The rumble of Harley-Davidson engines echoed through the streets of Sydney. Men in leather jackets, each one bearing the fearsome image of Genghis Khan, rode through the city with an aura that made ordinary citizens step aside. They were known as the Mongols Motorcycle Club, and they had just declared war on Australian law enforcement. What began as 3 small chapters along the New South Wales coast quickly exploded into one of the most violent and organized criminal enterprises the country had ever seen. This was no ordinary biker club. It was a brotherhood that would force police to rethink their entire approach and launch the most coordinated law enforcement response in Australian history. The man who brought this storm to Australia was Peter "Chop" Emerton. In 2013, he established the first Mongols chapters in the country, importing a brand of organized crime that had terrorized communities in the United States for decades. But Emerton wasn't content with just running a club. He had far more ambitious plans. Within months, he engineered the largest gang merger in Australian history. At the time, the Finks, one of Australia's most established motorcycle clubs, were facing a government crackdown. Emerton offered them a lifeline: join the Mongols and become part of something bigger. Nearly overnight, 90% of the Finks defected. The Mongols transformed from a small coastal gang into a national empire with more than 400 members across 5 states. They inherited drug routes, weapons suppliers, and territorial strongholds that had taken decades to secure. Law enforcement was now facing a threat unlike any they had ever encountered: the criminal takeover. The scale of what the Mongols achieved in such a short time was staggering. Court documents and intelligence reports revealed a group operating with the precision of a corporation but the ruthlessness of street criminals. Their primary business was methamphetamine trafficking, but this wasn't low-level dealing. Police investigations revealed operations moving over 50 pounds of nearly pure methamphetamine, with a street value exceeding $1 million. They had industrialized the drug trade. Millions were laundered through legitimate businesses. Extortion was rampant. Military-grade weapons began surfacing on the streets. The Mongols used violence not just for revenge, but as a calculated business strategy. Members wore patches that marked their status, and some patches allegedly identified those who had committed murder or violent acts for the club. But what made them even more dangerous was their understanding of image. They registered legal businesses, held charity events, and presented themselves as motorcycle enthusiasts, making it harder for police to draw a line between appearance and criminal intent. They were well organized and legally protected, with lawyers, accountants, and public relations strategies. They also learned from the mistakes of other criminal syndicates. Encrypted messaging apps, decentralized operations, and a strict code of silence made infiltration extremely difficult. Members were trained never to speak to authorities under any circumstances. By 2020, the Australian Federal Police had officially classified the Mongols as one of the big 6 outlaw motorcycle clubs in the country. But unlike traditional groups, the Mongols brought a level of sophistication and ambition that changed the game entirely. The violence begins. The first major sign of trouble came with the assassination of Shane Bowden on October 12, 2020. Bowden had been a key figure in the original Finks before joining the Mongols during the 2013 merger, but after a violent internal incident, he was expelled. Seeking redemption, Bowden returned to a reformed version of the Finks, rebuilding its numbers and influence. The Mongols viewed this as a direct threat. In their eyes, Bowden was a traitor, and he had to be dealt with. His assassination triggered a violent turf war in southeast Queensland between the Mongols and the reformed Finks. This wasn't random street violence. This was organized, relentless conflict. On June 5, 2021, A barbershop in Windaroo was firebombed. Just 2 days later, Mongols and Finks members clashed in a brutal public brawl at the Australia Fair shopping centre in Southport. Shoppers fled in panic as weapons were drawn in broad daylight. When arrests were made, police uncovered documents confirming what they feared. Both gangs had issued attack-on-site orders. Any time members encountered a rival, violence was not only permitted, it was expected. Authorities realized they weren't dealing with gang skirmishes anymore. They were facing urban warfare with public spaces as battlegrounds. The violence didn't stop with rival clubs. Legal cases revealed shocking brutality, kidnappings, torture, and executions carried out with chilling precision. In one case, a former associate was kidnapped, tortured for hours, and murdered, all for allegedly stealing motorcycles and disrespecting the club. Disloyalty wasn't punished with expulsion. It was punished with death. The police fight back. When traditional policing failed, authorities escalated. Specialized task forces were created specifically to target outlaw motorcycle gangs. In New South Wales, the Raptor Squad was given wide-ranging powers and a focused mission: dismantle the Mongols by any means necessary. This was no longer just a criminal investigation. It had become a domestic counterinsurgency, an all-out campaign to destroy an organization that had become a national threat. These weren't ordinary police officers. They were specially trained operatives with access to intelligence resources usually reserved for counterterrorism operations. The turning point came with the creation of National Task Force Morpheus, not just another police unit, but a joint initiative that united every major law enforcement agency in Australia and New Zealand. For the first time in Australian history, agencies that usually worked independently began sharing intelligence in real time, coordinating operations across state lines and deploying resources on a scale typically used only during national emergencies. Contributing agencies included the Australian Federal Police, all state and territory police forces, the Australian Border Force, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the Australian Defence Force, the Australian Taxation Office, and Services Australia. The Mongols had brought military-style organization to crime. Law enforcement responded with military-style coordination. Task Force Morpheus adopted a comprehensive strategy that caught the Mongols completely off guard. Traditional raids focused only on drugs or weapons. These new operations struck every branch of the Mongols Empire at once. While tactical teams executed search warrants and raided properties, the Australian Taxation Office investigated financial records for tax evasion. Immigration officers checked the visa status of international members. Services Australia examined welfare fraud. The Australian Border Force tracked cross-border movement. The Mongols quickly realized that their success made them vulnerable in unexpected ways. Their legitimate businesses became targets for audits and regulatory investigations. Their financial wealth triggered the application of asset seizure laws under proceeds of crime legislation. Most importantly, Task Force Morpheus represented a shift in strategy. Instead of reacting to crimes after they occurred, police began targeting the infrastructure that allowed organized crime to function in the first place. The first major strike. The first major test of this new approach came on December 3, 2020, with a coordinated nationwide operation. In one day, police conducted synchronized raids in multiple states, resulting in 18 arrests, the seizure of nearly 30 firearms, large quantities of drugs, and significant amounts of cash, all linked directly to the Mongols. Victoria Police Acting Assistant Commissioner Mick Fruin emphasized the impact, stating, "This is a group known for violent crimes, such as shootings, assaults, arson, drug trafficking, extortion, and intimidation. Nearly 20 search warrants were executed simultaneously. Thanks to intelligence collected by the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, law enforcement was able to map the Mongols' internal structure with precision. They knew who the leaders were, where they lived, how they communicated, and what roles they held within the club. According to AFP Acting Commander Sasha Rinaldi, the public needs to understand that outlaw motorcycle gangs are not harmless clubs. They are organized criminal enterprises causing harm and disruption throughout our country. The information gathered during the raids was shared instantly across the country. Evidence seized in Sydney could support an investigation in Perth. Details found in Melbourne could lead to an arrest in Brisbane. The Mongols' tactic of keeping operations isolated was no longer effective against an enemy that communicated and coordinated nationally. The operation's success prompted a new phase in law enforcement strategy. Sporadic raids evolved into sustained nationwide campaigns aimed at systematically dismantling the Mongols' organization. Operation Victor Jenga. While national efforts dominated the headlines, key breakthroughs were also made on a smaller scale, especially in Cairns, Queensland. Operation Victor Jenga launched in August 2023. Named after the game where removing a single block collapses the tower, the operation aimed to identify and remove the crucial players holding the Mongols' growing Cairns chapter together. This chapter was particularly concerning because, unlike older ones inherited through the merger with the Finks, it was being built from scratch. Detective Senior Sergeant Brad Grace of the Far North Major and Organized Crime Squad stated, "Outlaw motorcycle clubs are not welcome in the Far North, and we will not tolerate behavior that brings fear and harm to our community." The investigation uncovered how methodical the Mongols were in their expansion strategy. Intelligence showed they were recruiting local criminals, setting up drug distribution systems, and building the infrastructure needed for large-scale illegal operations. In October 2023, police conducted raids across properties in Smithfield, Kawara Beach, Moorabool, Redlynch, Holloways Beach, and Edmonton. These actions led to 7 arrests and 17 criminal charges, including assault, drug trafficking, and firearms violations. Acting Detective Inspector Mark Andrews made the police position clear. If you are a member of or associated with organized crime groups such as the Mongols, you will be targeted. By May 2024, another wave of police raids led to 6 more arrests and 23 new charges, including grievous bodily harm and regularly consorting with known offenders. One of the most revealing moments occurred when a man was arrested at Cairns Airport for allegedly assaulting someone who disrupted a photo. This wasn't random violence. It was an example of the Mongols enforcing their code of respect through intimidation. Electronic devices seized during the raids contained images of members of the Mongols' Cairns City chapter wearing club-branded clothing, effectively documenting their affiliation and actions. By November 2024, Operation Victor Jenga had achieved major successes, with numerous arrests and the disruption of Mongols' expansion into far northern Queensland. The intelligence war behind these high-profile arrests was an intelligence war that most Australians never saw. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission's ACIC coordination centers marked a new era in law enforcement. For the first time, data on outlaw motorcycle gangs was being collected, analyzed, and shared across the nation in real time. These centers weren't just focused on past crimes. They created predictive models to forecast future violence, identify rising leaders, and trace the movement of money, drugs, and weapons across state lines. The Mongols discovered that their usual methods of secrecy were no match for modern surveillance. Encrypted messages were deciphered through metadata analysis. Financial records left digital trails. Most concerning for the club was the infiltration of human intelligence networks. Members themselves were turning into police informants. What emerged was a detailed picture of the organization. Law enforcement created maps of leadership structures, financial operations, decision-making processes, and internal conflict resolution strategies. This intelligence advantage led to police actions that seemed almost unreal in their precision. Officers showed up at the right time, arrested the right people, and seized exactly the evidence they needed. The Mongols became paranoid, convinced that their every move was being watched. The trust between members began to crack. Their once powerful international structure turned into a liability as Australian and foreign police forces began sharing information. Members who fled the country found they were already on watch lists abroad. The escalation. By 2024, the conflict had reached new levels. In 1 week alone, police arrested 159 people, laid 693 charges, and seized 43 firearms and over $1 million in cash. Nearly 2,100 officers were involved, more than some countries use for national security deployments. These large-scale operations had become routine. What would have made national headlines years ago was now just another chapter in the fight against outlaw motorcycle gangs. The Mongols were forced to adapt. Their once bold and public operations were replaced with smaller, lower-risk activities that generated less money but attracted less police attention. They decentralized their organization, operating more like a network of loosely connected cells rather than a single unified group. This made it harder to shut them down entirely, but also harder to coordinate internally. Financial investigations also proved highly effective. By seizing assets and initiating civil forfeiture actions, law enforcement made it financially disadvantageous to remain involved. Legal costs, asset losses, and declining criminal income made membership a liability. Recruitment slowed. Young people saw the constant raids, surveillance, and prosecutions and lost interest in joining. The Mongols were no longer an appealing path for those seeking status or power. The current battlefield. In August 2024, another national police operation resulted in more arrests across multiple states. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, ACIC, continued to rank outlaw motorcycle gangs as the biggest organized crime threat to the country. ACIC's acting executive director, Wendy Darling, said, "The ACIC works closely with partners both nationally and internationally to make Australia hostile to criminal exploitation." These new operations hit every aspect of the gang's infrastructure. While tactical units executed search warrants, other departments targeted tax fraud, welfare scams, immigration violations, and money laundering. Detective Chief Inspector David Huey from South Australia Police reported numerous arrests for violent crimes and drug trafficking. Seizures included loaded handguns, large quantities of meth and cocaine, and over $100,000 in cash. Law enforcement now even monitors prison communications, searches cells, and tracks financial transactions across multiple jurisdictions. How the Mongols have responded. The Mongols have grown even more secretive. Communications are now heavily encrypted. Meetings are held in remote locations. New recruits undergo strict vetting to detect possible undercover officers. In a bid to improve their public image, the gang has also become more involved in charity work and legitimate businesses. But police have matched this move with equally advanced counterintelligence. A new era of crime and enforcement. The ongoing battle between the Mongols and Australian law enforcement is more than a gang crackdown. It's a glimpse into how modern organized crime is fought in the digital age. The Mongols brought a hybrid model of criminal operation, combining old-school biker gang culture with modern business-like criminal methods. In response, Australian authorities created new systems of coordination, data sharing, and predictive policing, the same tools developed to fight the Mongols, like those used by Task Force Morpheus, are now being applied to other organized crime groups. But the story of the Mongols also shows the limitations of policing. Despite all the arrests and pressure, the group still exists. The bigger picture communities hit hardest by the Mongols' violence often face poverty, lack of jobs, and limited opportunities, conditions that make gang recruitment easier. Until those root issues are addressed, gangs will continue to find new members. This long-running war has proven that law enforcement has the tools to track, disrupt, and prosecute criminal groups like never before. But it has also shown that gangs can adapt quickly and continue to operate. The future of this fight won't be decided by brute force or numbers alone. It will come down to who adapts faster. The Mongols are no longer unstoppable, and Australian law enforcement is no longer uncoordinated. The war has reshaped the criminal landscape. It's still evolving, and the fight for control over Australia's streets is far from over. The real question is no longer if this war will end, but how it will continue to evolve.